Hello and welcome to the Snickerdoodle Knits YouTube channel. I am Jessica, the knitting designer and teacher behind Snickerdoodle Knits. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to create a bobble. Now, there's several ways to create bobbles. Different ones that are larger or smaller, or different ways that you work them back and forth and different things like that. Now, this is the bobble that I'm using specifically for the Gracefully shawl that I designed for the Grace Callie Mystery Knit Along for Tippy Tree Yarns in July of 2021. And this technique you can use generally, modifying it according to your needs as well. So the general idea is that I'm taking one stitch, creating 4 stitches out of it, and then I'm working it back and forth for several rows before decreasing it down to 1 stitch. So I can kind of walk you through a few modifications. One thing that I'm also demonstrating in this video is how to knit backwards. So oftentimes if you're creating a bobble, you have to turn your work to purl back across the bobble. But here I'm going to demonstrate how you can quote unquote knit backwards to work those stitches instead. So here I have just a couple, let's create a couple knit stitches first before creating the bobble. Alright, so what I've done for this bobble stitch is I've instructed you to knit front and back twice into this stitch. Now if you would rather, you can knit one yarn over, knit one yarn over, instead of working through the back of the stitch, if that works better for you. I found personally the yarn overs created a looser look, and it wasn't quite as tidy, but I'm also a loose knitter, so you can take that into account. But to knit front and back, that's the knit front back the first time, and we will do that a second time here. And there we have created 4 stitches out of 1. Now to knit backwards, we're going to bring the left needle into the stitch here and wrap the yarn from under the needle and over, and then just slide that stitch off. So it's like we're working off of the right needle back to the left. So bring it to the back of that stitch, just from the bottom up, wrap the yarn around the bottom and over, off. So if you don't want to knit backwards, you can also just purl across these 4 stitches. So I'm just knitting backwards across those 4 stitches. Now what that does is it twists these stitches. So you can tell these normal knit stitches over here, they slant this way so that the yarn comes from the back to the front of this side. This has them twisted as if they were worked through the back loop. So it's coming from the front across the back to this front part of the stitch here. So what we need to do is we need to knit through the back loop across these 4 stitches. Now if you purl across the stitches, you just knit them. But I'm just going to knit through the back loop for those 4 stitches. So now I have worked a total of 2 rows. I knitted backwards and now I've knit, and we're going to work this for a total of 5 rows. So this is the 3rd, knitting backwards across the stitches. And this is continental style knitting, but it's the same idea, English style. It's just a matter of where you have the yarn, really. So that's the 3rd row. Knit through the back loop for the 4th row. And again, if you choose to purl instead of knitting backwards, don't knit through the back loop, just knit normally. All right, knit through the back loop, not knit through the back loop, knit backwards across those 4 stitches. All right, so now we have worked 5 rows across those 4 stitches. The reason why I've done 5 is this shawl was actually designed in fingering weight. This yarn that I'm using right now, this is DK weight, so it's a little bit bulkier, but with the fingering weight, I found that I really liked the 5 rows to create a nice big substantial bobble. Now we're just going to decrease these. If you wanted, you could just knit 4 together, but it doesn't quite center the stitch the same way that I like. So if you find it easier, just go ahead and knit 4 together. What I like to do is slip this first stitch purlwise onto the right needle. And then I'm going to take this second stitch on the left needle and pull it over and off the first stitch. So there I decreased 1. Now I'm going to slip this first stitch over to the right needle, and I'm going to pull this second stitch over and off the needle. And then I'm going to slide this stitch back over to the left needle and take the second stitch and slide it over and off the needle. So now I'm left with just 1 stitch, and I slide that back over to the right needle, and that's the end of my bobble. So there, let's see if I can get it to focus. That's how it creates that decrease. It kind of really centers one of those stitches instead of just decreasing them all together. Now, after you knit the bobble, you want to kind of make sure that these knit stitches are pretty tight, just to get that to stay securely. And then when we purl back across, we're going to want to make sure these stitches, so the stitch on either side and the bobble stitch, purl those pretty tightly as well. And that is key to making sure your stitch doesn't fall back through the back of your fabric. All right, so I've just knit 3 and I'm going to do another bobble stitch. So again, I'm doing a knit front back twice. You can do a knit 1 yarn over times 2, so that would be knit 1 yarn over, knit 1 yarn over. And then we're going to knit backwards across those 4 stitches. Again, you can purl if you want, so you would just purl this way and purl 4 across. But so we don't have to turn our fabric, which I find very helpful when you're knitting a larger shawl that has a bunch of fabric on it, and you're knitting several bobbles. I think it's a lot more convenient to just knit backwards. So again, we'll bring the left needle into this stitch behind the right needle, wrap the yarn under the needle and over, and then we just finish that stitch. And again, knitting the second stitch backwards, and the third stitch, and the 4th stitch. And so that is our first row of working stockinette across this. And again, the way that we are creating that knitting backwards, we need to work through the back loop. So we're going to knit through the back loop across these 4 stitches. Now again, if you purled, instead of knitting backwards, just knit these 4 stitches regularly. But since I knitted backwards, I need to knit these through the back loop. So I'm going to knit 4 stitches through the back loop. And that is our second row. So we will continue that pattern for a total of 5 rows. So knitting backwards for a 3rd row, and then knitting through the back loop for the 4th row, and then knitting backwards for the 5th row. So ways you could modify this bobble would be to work a different number of rows. You could work 3, you could work 7, you could even work 4, or how many ever you want. And then you can also modify the number that you cast on down here. So you could do a knit front back, and then, or you could do like a knit 1, yarn over, knit 1 to have 3 stitches instead of 4 stitches. But you can change the number of stitches you have created here. You can change the number of stitches, rows that you work across. And then, like I mentioned before, you can change how you increase and you can change how you decrease. So again, I'm going to demonstrate how I choose to decrease so that these 4 stitches become 1. Again, you could knit 4 together. If you're purling across, you would just knit 4 together. If you're knitting backwards across, you would need to knit the 4 together through the back loop. So what that would look like would just be going through all 4 stitches. This is what it looks like, bringing your needle through back loop there, and you would just knit that. But again, I'm doing it so that I can try to center that decrease a bit. So slipping the first stitch to the right needle, picking up the second stitch and pulling it over the first stitch on the needle and off. So that's the left needle. Sliding that first stitch just purlwise. Because if we were to do it knitwise, we would twist that stitch. So we need to do it purlwise to the right needle. And then we are going to pick up this stitch here and pull it over the first one and off the needle. And we will slide that stitch back purlwise to the left needle. And then we will pull this second stitch over the first one and off the needle. And now we just have one left. And we slide that purlwise to the other needle. And so now we've completed that bobble. And again, remember to knit this stitch tightly next to it. And I will go ahead and work across the back, showing you what the bobbles look like once after we've worked 1 purl row. So I'm knitting the first 2 stitches just as a border for the swatch, and then I'm going to purl across. And remember to purl the stitches around that bobble tightly. So that's this stitch here, this is our bobble, and then this stitch here, because you can see how here there's a bit of a gap here, and we do not want that gap. So purl tightly across those 3 stitches, the bobble stitch and the 2 next to it. And really you could purl the whole row tightly if you wanted to. And again, here's the other bobble, so purl this one tightly, the bobble stitch, and the one next to it, and then complete the row. And here, these 2 are part of my border again. So this is what our bobbles look like complete. So they're a big squishy bobble, and they really are raised from the fabric quite a lot. And that is this demonstration on how to work a bobble. So this is increasing 1 stitch into 4 stitches, working 5 rows of stockinette, either purling across or knitting backwards across. And then on other rows, if you're purling across, you just knit back across. If you're knitting backwards across, you want to knit through the back loop back across. And then when we decrease, we're decreasing those 4 stitches back down to 1 stitch. So you can do that through a knit 4 together, or knit 4 together through the back loop if you've been knitting backwards, or through the method that I demonstrated. So I hope you found this video helpful, informative, and easy to follow. If you found it helpful, go ahead and hit the thumbs up, to like the button, and follow Snickerdoodle Knits, the YouTube channel, for additional knitting tutorial content like this. I also have design overview videos for each of my patterns walking you through what the pattern includes, sizes, yarns, on all of that information before you ever purchase the pattern. So I hope to see you around, and happy knitting!